So if you want to get going otherwise.
Okay, all right, so let's start, yeah? Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Family Services Select Committee. I'm Councillor Wala Idris, and I will be chairing the committee. And this event is being streamed live on YouTube, and members of the public and the media are welcome to watch the meeting remotely and listen to the discussion taking place. Now, I would like to welcome those in the committee room 1 at the town hall, everyone watching on YouTube. Before we proceed with the meeting, I would ask everyone present to please make sure your mobiles are on silent or turned off. And I think also it will be appropriate if we start this meeting with a 72-second silence to remember those who lost in the Grenfell tragedy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Apologies for absence have been received from Councillors Toby Benton, David Lindsay, and Doris Schmitterman, Mr. Terry Dricky, and Mrs. Stella Gomez. And I don't think we have any further apologies. Thank you. Declaration of interest. Does anyone have an interest to declare? Okay. And now we go to the minutes. The minutes of the previous meeting have been circulated. Does the committee agree with the minutes? Are correct? Yeah. The correction. Okay, then we can swiftly move on to item 1A. This report provides information on the additional support offered to young people in Kensington and Chelsea, including enrichment activities, mentoring and learning support for children and young people in the borough.
Sorry, excuse me, Chair. Just on the last item, I seem to remember that somebody made a point about how did we make sure that the actions that contained in the minutes got followed up and completed. And I didn't know if you wanted to say anything to that.
Well, because we have now circulated.
But that's not something the general public could see, so.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely. Well, do you want to
yes, I mean, I made the, I posed the question as to what process was for picking up on actions from previous meetings, and that if it was difficult to track these, we needed to be careful about what we said in the way of recommendations or actions, because we need to be proportionate. If you've got too many and it's unrealistic, then it's not going to happen. If it's realistic and they are going to happen, then there needs to be some process of tracking them, because there's nothing more frustrating than actions that have been promised and then nothing happens. So that was the point. Sorry.
And this was produced as a result.
Yeah.
So,
This is-
Jackie, would you like to add?
Right, okay. We can put that on the website with the papers, but also Luke, as the committee clerk, will be producing that as a document to go into the future agendas, and it will come after the minutes.
Yeah.
So Luke is very diligent. We absolutely do follow up on actions, and it isn't something that we would get about or recommendations, because that's important that scrutiny can show it's following through its
If
work.
I could be clear, I wasn't implying criticism of any individual officer.
No, no,
It was
I
just that
fully understand it's about
we
the
didn't
process.
here have a process.
Yeah, so we have got one, and we take on board what you're saying, and it will be in the minutes.
And as a one-off, this one will go with the minutes.
Yeah, we can do that, yeah,
Thank you.
okay.
Sorry. Going back to this report provides, okay, I'm gonna jump straight up and invite Councillor Falk, the lead member for Family and Children's Services, and any supporting officers to comment on the report.
Would you like me to introduce them?
Absolutely, yeah, please.
So if I may remind the committee that you requested a report to highlight or requested information in relation to the additional support provided to young people. So this is additional support above and beyond our statutory responsibilities. So the report highlights significant areas of expenditure or investment, you might say. So for example, in 2.1 and 2.4, you can see substantial money that's been supported in those areas. You will also see that the actual services comprise of a combination of community and voluntary services, along with some in-house provisions. I'd also like to draw your attention to section 4 of the report, which helps to illustrate how this investment is contributing to the impact and outcome on children's attainment.
I'm going to start with a couple of questions from David Lindsay. He asked, what different youth and community groups do across the borough, particularly in North Kensington, and the degree to which there is best practice, duplication, cooperation, and competition. And his second question is the role of KNC Foundation and their commitments.
Shall I start with that? I mean, I don't quite understand the question of duplication. I mean, obviously, we're giving them money. What you've got here is for specific things, specific areas that we want them to report back on us and show us how they're delivering on it. So obviously, Rugby Portobello Trust, Cameron James, how there is some crossover in that they're all dealing with young people.
Yeah.
But the money that we're putting in and we're talking about here, or it's spread between them. So out of school learning, what are you saying? Current council currently commissions 133,000 for out of school learning, and that's across several different agencies. So does he want to see which agent does what exactly and for how much?
Maybe because also, I'll put in a question that I wanted to ask. It doesn't give me numbers. You have a number of organizations.
Yeah.
You have a lump sum of money, a number of organizations.
Yeah.
But how many people or how many students is each organization helping?
Okay, I mean,
Do you have an idea?
I think that's in some of the reporting data contained in the report, but we can provide
Okay.
a more holistic response. I guess the other thing to say in response to Councillor Lindsay's question is that the Commission services was very much driven by community aspirations as well. You'll recall the extensive community engagement that was undertaken in 2019 in terms of the youth review, and currently we are concluding the revised consultation in relation to the next Commissioning strategy. So it will be an iterative, it is an iterative process linked to new demands, new needs that are identified, and how well provision is actually being provided.
And that's exactly what we're in the middle of right now. So we've just been listening to the new youth review, which will, maybe made to change this. Shall I just, do you want to carry on with that, or shall I just quickly pick up on the bit about the Kensington Chelsea Foundation?
Absolutely, yeah, go ahead.
So what was exactly his question, how we work with them, or?
I think he wanted to know the role of the foundation and their comments.
So obviously the Kensington Chelsea Foundation is, it receives money, donations, which they then distribute independently of us. So what they will be providing in the community is, their decision really to provide it. And obviously we do talk to them and have discussions, being aware of duplications, that we don't want to all be putting our money in the same thing. But so, for example, for employment, they have a particular one programme that they fund from there, which we're aware of, and it sits alongside other programmes that we have. So we're hoping that they are sort of a very good additional complementary to us, but we can't have any say over
Okay, because
what
it's
they do.
an independent organisation.
One of the lessons that came out of Brentford, or has come out of Brentford, is the resilience of the community was very powerful, very strong. And the question is, how does this play into that? Alongside that question is how you measure what is success, what are the sort of key performance indicators. I mean, maybe there are different kinds of progress. So there's a specific thing about outcomes, and then there's how that reinforces the enabling the community to have increased resilience.
I think, well, I was about to say that's exactly what we're doing in the youth review. I mean, that's the piece of work we're in the middle of. So I hope when we have got the sort of first, we've now taken the evidence, so to speak, then we're going to compile what we think is what we've heard, and then obviously we'll go back and test that. But part of that evidence will be, this is what I was worried about when the commission, we decided to do it, was, were there a few children that were accessing a lot of our services, and a lot of children that weren't accessing any of our services. So were they being evenly spread, and what outcomes were we getting? And were they the right outcomes that the young people wanted or expected or were looking for, the needs they had? So it's a very good question, but I think it's what we're working on.
You were going to say the same.
Yeah.
North Kensington Inclusion Pilot, I was going to
Yes,
perhaps draw that out to section 3.3, I beg your pardon, in relation to exactly as you say, Mr. Pascal, the impact of Grenfell, listening to the community, and the requests from our schools and more broadly from parents in the community about additional support that may be needed. And the North Kensington School Inclusion Pilot is currently funded by the council through Grenfell Recovery. It's additional, isn't it, Glenn, to the core work necessarily help do, and it's very much focused on schools where there are perhaps relatively lower attendance rates or relatively slightly higher rates of what we now call suspensions, formerly fixed term exclusion rates. And in essence, as the paragraph tells you, there are embedded early help workers at a number of schools in North Kensington. I chair the Grenfell Education Fund steering group, where we also monitor and look for feedback on the North Kent Inclusion Pilot, and we get really good feedback from schools about it. So that would be a really good example of where the community, the school community is saying this works. We then need to take that feedback with our colleagues in the Grenfell Partnerships team to see how that kind of provision might continue moving forward.
And maybe some of the lessons learned from experience in North Borough, particularly around Grenfell. Yes. Once the pilots were concluded, can we then learn lessons from other parts of the borough as well?
We certainly are, and we're having those conversations with our head teachers, for example, around what we're learning in the north and whether or not we might be able to replicate something similar in the section.
And it's an additional detail, but you'll see in that section that part of the Grenfell Recovery funding and part of the pilot also relates to commissioned advocacy offer for parents. Because some of the feedback we had, I guess across the borough, particularly in North Kensington, where there is perhaps a suspension, fixed term exclusion for a child, or regretfully, but very rarely in this borough, a permanent exclusion, parents aren't always clear on the process, and it's quite a complex area. So the aim is through the voluntary sector to provide that additional support for parents where they might need it, in terms of working with the school, working with governors to understand the process. If they wanted to appeal against the suspension, provide some support and advice around that.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry,
Okay,
Sonia, go
thank
ahead.
you. When the council commissions services, how is that determined? Is it where we consider there to be a gap in the market in the existing voluntary sector, or is it that existing organisations aren't able to provide those services? So how do we decide where we are going to actively commission those services, and what do we provide to those organisations that deliver those services? Are they given some sort of funding or some sort of formal endorsement?
Well, there's a commissioning process that
Yes.
would be undertaken, and as Councillor Fox has integrated, we're just going through the early stages of that revised commissioning process. So firstly, it's around consulting with the community which we serve,
Yeah.
and ascertaining what they've experienced in terms of the services that are currently in place. Identifying what's working well, what we think might not be working well, where there might be gaps. And then there would be a commissioning process where our voluntary and community sector partners would be able to bid for pockets of finance. In relation to your question around how we're equipping our voluntary and community sector to engage in that process, I think there's a whole range of support to our voluntary and community sector partners in terms of the kind of administration of application and helping them to be able to do that in an open and transparent way.
Okay, thank you.
Mrs. Sayers?
Yeah, I've got two questions, if I may. One at 2.10 about the Unlock programme.
Yeah.
As you probably know, I'm involved with two schools. Neither of whom have actually heard of this programme yet, and yet it was due to be launched in September, and we're obviously near the end of the month. So I just wondered how it was rolling out, or if indeed it was rolling out.
So absolutely it is rolling out, and it has just started, but the first sort of stage of it is that they are now talking to the schools to see if the schools want them to come in, how how they can accommodate them coming in, and how it will work with the schools. So that's absolutely the first stage of it. So that they're now going around all the schools going, this is what we're here to do, this is what we've been funded to do. So hopefully we will see some delivery next term. But
I've given both head teachers the heads up, so they're waiting for the call.
all right, good.
And also at 4.3 is possibly a foolish question, and my maths is never very good, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So we're sort of proudly saying we've got 95.5% of 16, 17-year-olds engaged in education as described. Of these, so whether it's education or apprenticeships, of these 80.8 go into higher education, and a small cohort, 1.1, going to apprenticeships. What happens to the rest? Do we know?
Right.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
So I should say, and apologies, we could perhaps have included the most recent national data here. So that engagement in EAT, as it's called, education, employment and training, at 95.5% of 16, 17-year-olds is above national and above London. I suppose then you add on the 1.1%, probably apprenticeships are tracked separately, but the destinations of that small percentage remaining will be unknown. So that's the work of our tracking provider to try and ensure that we have known destinations or known engagement for all those young people. So there'll always be a proportion. Maybe you've dropped out of college, maybe finished a course, not moved on to something else. When we come on to our data dashboard paper, you'll also see details about our not in education, employment and training cohort, which accounts for some of the missing percentage.
So just coming back at you, I don't find sort of 9% a small number. I find it quite a significant number. Again, this is my maths from stupid. So you say 95%, and of those, 81% of them go to higher education, 1% of them go to apprenticeships. There's a lot left.
as I understand it, the 8.8% is a subset of that 97.
Yes, of course.
So,
No,
so
I
but
understand that.
that's when they become 18. So perhaps we've slightly confused it
Yes.
because there are two, we're referring to two separate data
Yes.
sets really
I
here.
think you have confused it then.
Yeah,
because it looks
I think
like
it's
there are-
apples and pears.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
So-
it's like 8.88 whatever is lost, no, is unknown what they're
It's
doing.
nearly 20%.
20%,
actually.
yes.
Yeah, which is a
Yes.
significant number.
Yeah.
And actually, for that separate age group of 18 upwards, it is an incredibly high percentage to have 80% going on to higher education. That's because, if you go back to 16, 17-year-olds, the 95.5%, a huge majority of them will be studying A-level provision. This is the tracking of the year 11 cohorts in our state secondary schools, regardless of where they live. Because our attendance is so high, many of those people go on to study A-levels either locally or elsewhere. Hence, then at 18, the progression onto higher education is so high.
Just labouring the point again, so 16, 17-year-olds to 18 could go into either education or apprenticeships. This 1% going into apprenticeships here is at a later point they're going into apprenticeships and the others are going to college or university.
That's right, and apologies, it's not as clear as it could be.
No, I've got it now, thank you.
Because that 95.5% will be education, A-levels, vocational
got it.
studies, or it could be training, i.e. apprenticeships,
Sure.
or it's a very small number in employment, and the 4.5% probably we're tracking as
Yes,
unknown, may have
yes.
dropped out, being tracked and supported to go back into one of the three areas.
Okay, thank you very much.
Could I ask a question on that?
Okay.
Just to clarify this same way, not all of the people in that cohort are going to be residents in the borough.
Correct.
And neither of them are all residents in the borough going to go to schools and educational establishments in the borough.
That's
They may
right.
go to places outside. So again, there's potential for confusion here.
There absolutely is. So this is how the government requires us to track the cohort. So as I say, it's based on the year 11 cohort in our secondary schools. But the nuances in terms when we come on to NEETs, not education, employment, and training, but we can talk a bit more about that. But if we are aware of, I'll give an example of a 17-year-old Kensington Chelsea resident, whichever school they went to goes to say Richmond College, and they drop out. Richmond College should tell our tracking provider and Glenn's early help team, and then they become our local responsibility because they live locally to try and get them back into education, employment or training.
But I think that I'm really supporting Amanda. A little bit more clarification here.
I think you just need to break things out, don't you, and
Let's make it idiot-proof.
And I know last year
idiot proof, we like that.
we brought a longer paper on needs and need provisions. We can absolutely hear that.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Councillor.
Thank you. 2.3 and 2.5. First of all, could committee members go and attend to assess and to observe what's happening? And the second question is, do we have any mechanisms by which we could assess and oversee the delivery of these programs to see are they really delivering something?
I think what you might want to see is what the measures are in place for commissioning and scrutinise aspects of that in terms of whether or not they're delivering on the key milestones that have been set. In terms of your question about whether or not you can visit, I think committee members, councillors visit a range of provision.
No, I meant unarranged. We could just go and observe and sit there to see
Very
what's happening.
difficult for future men to observe it, I think, from what they're doing. Because it's a
It'd
sort of
have to be-
outreach
it'd have
and
to be
one-to-one
negotiated
support,
with
and it's
their-
quite a sensitive
Yeah.
cohort of people that they'd be working with. So I think they wouldn't be particularly happy about being observed, the work that's going on for them.
But do we have council officers assessing their job, or are we relying on their reports and their feedback?
Any commission service has a range of processes that are in place to reassure ourselves that the money that we're investing, if you like, is being delivered appropriately. So we can provide you with some feedback on, if you would want, on what the measures are for future men that could be something that we can provide through our commissioning colleagues.
Okay. 2.6, could you explain to me a bit more, because I couldn't understand what's happening here, mental health, and how they are delivering these sessions, and who's benefiting exactly?
Well, I'll start and then I'll do a bit. In fact, I just to say, because Ian and colleagues had a fantastic mental health conference here on Tuesday, where we had head teachers, governors, and Mind, and all the organisations that are involved in mental health, sort of feeding back to us some of the different things that they were doing. And this is actually Mind, as it says here. So Mind are providing the mental health workers into our youth clubs, and it's just been incredibly positive. We've had feedback from the youth clubs that they just love having them there. So they're there for young people to sort of pick up, go and talk to them, and they develop relationships with the young people that turn up to the youth clubs to be able to support them. So, I mean, they go into the schools as well, don't they, Ian? So Ian can talk a bit more about their, in all our schools now?
Yes. So we, the offer's gone to all schools.
Gone to all schools, yes.
And most of them have taken that up. So
Yeah.
we've got mental health support teams in schools.
Yeah.
Essentially their remit is to support children, obviously working with the schools
Yeah.
where there's perhaps a mild to moderate mental
Yes.
health need. We had a really interesting discussion, I think, with heads, and this was primary and secondary heads actually from both boroughs, with a lot of our health partners, about the targeted offer, the more specialist offer. So I think the aim here again, some of the feedback we'll have had is actually you may be able to reach young people perhaps through youth provision, and therefore in addition to what the NHS essentially commissions for sport in schools, the council itself is funding this mental health support through Mind in our youth clubs. And as you can see, their analysis is they're accessing, supporting 54 children's young people.
Was this the afternoon session that we had the other day?
Yes.
Yeah, I was at a park walk meeting this morning, and the deputy head teacher commented on how very useful
It was really, really good. But again, it's all part of the sort of trying to do a bit more early intervention, as you were saying. So before you get to a more serious case, to pick up things and to sort of even for these youth workers to spot. So maybe the young person isn't actually approaching them, but they might think there's something about their behaviour or they're not interacting with people, that they can bring them into a conversation to try and see if they need some more help and support.
Yeah, it's a rich tapestry, isn't it, of intervention.
Yeah.
But this particular support wouldn't be diagnosing mental health.
No,
That's
exactly.
in our hands.
Yeah, but it's
This would be really very much around low-level mental health, such as anxiety, low-level depression, etc. Helping young people to speak openly about their thoughts, feelings, and so on, to help them develop mental health skills, and by doing that within a provision where they feel comfortable and competent, such as the youth space, is probably better than them going into what might be seen as a more clinical setting.
And 2.10, it says pathways into local employment for 10 to 18-year-olds.
Yeah.
How could we deliver this? 10 to 11, 18.
So the Unlock is a programme that specifically works alongside businesses. So they're working on both sides. They're pulling together local business support, but and then they're going into schools and they're training children. A lot of it is about the usual stuff of soft skills. It's writing CVs. It's helping children understand what they need to do in order to get into work, how to apply for jobs, and that sort of training. But the interesting thing about this, which was is, as you see here, it says it creates problem-solving events and things like that. So it's for young children and older children to understand basically what the world of work looks like, what you need to do to be prepared to go into the world of work, and then for the older group, actually introducing and setting up sessions with some businesses as well.
And finally, and my final question, this is, I'm passionate about, I have had a motion in the council, last council meeting, because I have good reasons. My son, I had a difficult family life in the past 5-6 years, But despite that, my son managed to get straight A stars and went to Imperial this year. Not only that, he helped 3 more of his colleagues to get A stars in physics and chemistry. Because in the past 2 years, he spent hundreds of hours teaching them online because they're friends. So the 3 of them, all the 3 of them are going to Imperial next week. And the reason behind my motion was, I'm asking the same question, do we have an initiative or a program for one-to-one tuitions for students, especially GCSEs and A levels? Do we have this?
Well, I mean, I could start. I mean, we have, as I think we said in the motion, across the board, we have all sorts of mentoring things. There's some of it which we're delivering through our BCS. We've got people like Inter University. But actually, what I was interested in when I went to Chelsea Academy, when they were getting their results, their GCE spreads, that they buy into a separate service. Is it called Access Some? So some of the schools can actually bring in their own. They pay to bring in their own mentoring support as well as us providing it.
I think that's exactly as you said.
Yeah.
You know, schools are funded to do this work, and as I will always say,
Yeah.
we've got some of the best schools in the country.
Exactly.
So what
Best
we're
results.
seeking to do,
Yeah.
the early point, not duplicate but complement where we can.
Yeah.
Often it's about sharing good practice, forming links. I mean, it's a great opportunity around the lock, isn't there?
Yeah.
To help schools to strengthen relationships with businesses where, employees are able to give their time through mentors, offer support, but schools do have additional funding for one-to-one tuition and for catch-up. There was additional funding following COVID, money that went to all schools around tuition. There were quite a few parameters around that, as schools would say, but there is resource in schools to put that catch-up provision, and it might be small group interventions, tuition, or one-to-one tuition in place when needed.
So the council don't have such a program,
So
one-to-one.
we're not funded to do that. Schools are funded directly to do that.
Now I understand your passion about the one-to-one tuition, because you talked about it quite a few times.
Can I just say another thing about
Go ahead.
Lock? Because I think it's really important that when we did the original youth review, one of the key areas that young people were saying that they wanted was employment readiness. So this is an example, I guess, of how we've listened to the community and how we've implemented a service as a direct response to what they're saying that they need. One of many, I would say.
So I just add one more thing in response to Councillor Baxial's question. Obviously, where we hear that there might be a gap, we'll talk about more council accessing that support out of school. You'll see in 2.5, again, we talked about this earlier, that we do commission support for children as well in terms of homework clubs and activities in term time. That's out of school
But it is
provision.
group learning. I
That's-
meant one-to-one.
which happens in schools, to my earlier point. But what we're saying here is, if it may be that actually children will access support, perhaps not in school, not at lunchtime, not through a school homework club, we also commission support here as well. And of course, there's also provision, I should add, given I'm now responsible for libraries, we also have homework clubs running in our libraries as well.
And actually Inter University,
Yes.
they had they got 80 children into universities there last year, and they do get one-to-one support with volunteers that turn up to Inter University to help them. I mean, it's an incredible charity. We're so lucky to have it here in the borough.
Working with the secondary schools
Yes,
directly.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. There's any questions, Mary? Thank you very much. I think we talked quite a bit about a lot of things, services, how to identify them. We talked about the role of the Kensington and Chelsea Foundation and how we engage with them. Funding support, talked about the Unlock program at length, I think, we covered quite a bit there. And intervention and support to those who need mental health. So we can now move to item 5 in the agenda. Scrutiny has a vital role to play in mentoring the council's, monitoring the council performance, and all select committees have committed to receiving performance report as part of the work program. This report provides context and insight into progress against the CYPP outcome, lead member priorities, and our council plan. I would like to, would you guys, do anybody else, okay? Would you
Yes,
like to go ahead and?
thank you, Chair. So a couple of things to say. We've referred here to our Children and Young People's Plan. We consulted widely on that. A huge amount of consultation went on with young people to get their views about what our priorities should be. Obviously, you know, in children's services, a lot of our work is statutory, but within that, we were really keen to get people's views about what we should prioritise. And that then led to us, devising and ensuring we have a proper dashboard in place to track the priorities that people themselves would like us to focus on, along with that whole range of statutory measures that we are required to track. I mean, I'm hopeful that we've presented that in a very clear way, and I'm really quite passionate, as I said earlier, and there was a gap in comparing our local data with validated national and London data. So that's what you have before you. Now, Glenn and I thought we might highlight one or two areas with you, some that I think we're perhaps frankly really proud of in children's services, and others where, you know, we're still working on. So if I perhaps start on the education front, I'll just take you to slide 4, if that's okay. In the bottom right corner it says slide 4, so it's that one. There we go. So a couple of things to mention here. So an area I have to say, and I was just talking to Catherine about this a couple of days ago. You'll see that one of the measures local authorities are often compared with relates to the proportion of state-funded schools judged to be good or outstanding by Ofsted. Now, we're pretty pleased with 95% of our state schools being at good or outstanding. We'd love it to be 100%, and for us, because we're such a small borough, that's a couple of schools in that measure. But I do want to highlight in small print on the top right, outstanding at 55%. So that is the proportion of our schools judged to be outstanding. The national average is 17%.
1/7.
1/7. The national average proportion of outstanding schools in the local authority is 17%, and ours is 55%.
Can I just check? I
Yes.
mean, one of the things that I was disappointed by in this page was how very outdated the figures are. That 95%, is that current, or is that back to 22, which is what all the other figures seem
So,
to be?
as I said, all the latest validated data, so we do this on a termly basis. We don't update the figure based on Ofsted outcomes that we know about within the local authority that haven't been published. So this is based on published Ofsted reports, and that, Amanda, will be the latest cut as of the end of the summer term this year. But as I said, I thought I would draw out in terms of quality within our schools, and incredibly hard, I should say nowadays, for schools, and particularly primary schools, to be able to respond to a really tough Ofsted framework. And I completely agree with the focus on curriculum, of course, but actually it's really tough for a primary school to be able to respond to a deep dive in. Inspectors will turn up and say, let's do a deep dive in arts and PE and science. Well, you know, an ex-secondary school teacher, you know, we have departments in secondary schools. It's a bit different in primary, and actually, the majority of our schools are primary schools. Many of them, under the new framework, have been re-inspected and retained outstanding. Some have moved from good to outstanding. You know, one of their schools rather, and under a tougher framework. So really wanted to highlight that, because things are not easy for schools at the moment. Funding pressures, increasing the children with complex needs, and that really leads me on to an area we're still working on the same page. Draw your attendance to it on the bottom left, and that is in relation to school attendance. It's in the national press, isn't it, most days? Some of you may have seen the research, just talking to our Exec Director, Children's Services, Sarah Newman, about it. Really interesting research about, you know, some parents saying, sadly, they don't see attendance at school full time. That's perhaps been quite the priority it was. Some of the factors relating to cost of living, the housing that families are living in. So a whole range of reasons why we think attendance rates have gone down since COVID, and also persistent absenteeism has gone up. So our data, and this is validated up to the end of the academic year, July 2022, okay, this is DfE figures, we've got the comparators, and you'll see that KMC's performance on attendance, both phases, primary and secondary, is above national, but below London. And really interestingly, the Department for Education are visiting local authorities to understand what we're doing, with schools in relation to attendance. Predominantly the support comes through Glenn's team, through early help, and actually the feedback we got from the DFE, we had a range of colleagues there, Virtual School for looks after the children, Youth Justice team, across the sector, how we're working with really vulnerable children to get them back into school to improve their attendance. The DFE's feedback I summarise here then was, we think you're doing everything you can do, and actually some of what you're doing, we'd really like to ask you to share it with other local authorities if we could.
I think we may have been hit, sadly, not in our deprived areas, but in our more affluent middle class areas. When I was horrified only a few days ago, and the Telegraph ran a double-page spread where the correspondent herself was describing how she kept her children off and it was better to pay the fine, and showed all of the comparative figures for holidays. If that's what our educated journalists are saying, it's extremely difficult to deal with that.
No, absolutely. And another part of the research that's just been published was, comment on the appropriateness or otherwise of the sanctions and fining parents, and actually parents who are facing a cost of living crisis, we're not going to pay it anyway, and actually, maybe makes things more antagonistic with the school or the school working with the local authority rather than trying to build bridges and support the child back into school. So just perhaps on the other, sorry.
And the DFE advisor who came yesterday, it was only yesterday,
Yes.
basically said the self-evaluation document was very robust. She didn't recommend any changes to the evaluation. And as Ian said, the range of work that we're doing in this space, she was really very much requesting that we share that to other local authorities, which I think is really good testimony of the work that we're doing.
We've got to track to your point, the independent schools as well as the community schools and the church, faith schools, which actually we get no extra funding for. So that's sort of a bit cheeky of them.
It's not that I wasn't making the point about just the independent sector, but we've got, particularly in the primary state schools, we have a number of the schools that do attract some of the parents who perhaps then take them out in secondary.
Yeah.
But they've got enough money to go on holiday.
Yes. Yeah, no, we got a lot of feedback actually on Tuesday that some parents, as you were sort of saying, thought it was school was now optional.
Yeah. Wow.
And there were so many different approaches here. So we actually heard from our educational psychology team. You'll know in this borough, every school has a linked educational psychologist. They've done a lot of work, linked to research around what they call, emotion-based school avoidance. And they're trying to support schools to think about those approaches, upskilling school staff who are doing this work with families, but also working with the families themselves, where there are, because there are very different reasons for poor attendance. So I know Glenn wants to cover a couple of his areas, so perhaps just, if I could, I beg your pardon.
Just a question.
Of course.
On attendance.
Of course.
I take your point about validated data.
Yes.
The question is, do you have any update, even if it's early stages and not totally validated by people, as to where the direction of travel is going with our schools in terms of attendance now?
So locally, informally, we would say pretty similar. What I can't do is compare that to national London. So so that's the information. But locally, we sense it is pretty much around that same level.
We are requesting that all schools produce their attendance data on a live tracker, which we're investing in. So that will give us immediate
day by day
data.
And that helps for individual schools. We can't really say borough-wide that we have that information. But what schools do, put in simple terms, in the first 4 weeks where there's a concern about absence, the school should really be following that up. Ultimately schools are judged on their attendance through Ofsted, but obviously we have a coordinating role, and after 4 weeks the schools will say, well actually, we think it's a whole family issue here, we do need support from any help in Glenn's team. Actually, we know quite clearly here, parents taking their child out for a holiday during term time, that's an authorised absence that we know how we're going to deal with it ourselves.
Just to clarify, by attendance, do we mean children who are already registered to school and not? So it doesn't. So is there an issue with children not going to school at all in the borough? or not,
You mean
or perhaps being
home-educated, or-
homeschooled, or is there a decline in children, not necessarily taking more holidays or being away from school, but actually being in the sort of education system formally?
So we've got two groups of children that we track in this area. So Glenn's absolutely right. In the middle top of that row, we've got elective home education. Now, as you know, home education is legal in this country. And so if a parent writes to us, writes to local authority, writes to school to say, I wish to home educate my child, then legally they do that. We have a support mechanism in place, which is locally agreed, which involves an annual meeting or visit. Obviously, I have to say we have an eye for safeguarding as well there. There isn't yet in this country an elective home education register, but that is the intention of government, because that is a small number there, the 102.
So that's decreased as well.
It has, but that's the I have to really emphasise this. That's about children we know about. Some children have never been in the state system, independent system, and parents don't have to tell the local authority they're home educating. This is probably more about children that were in education have dropped out. So that's that group. The group you're probably referring to is a group of children we know about who are not in school and don't have a school place, and that's the group of children missing education.
Yeah.
I think I can get you that data. I don't think it's quite in our pack here. It's a relatively small number, because we work really hard to make sure children get a school place.
Yeah.
The group we're focused on particularly is they've got a school place, but they're not attending, which brings us back to attendance.
Thank you.
Do we, we
You
haven't
haven't
covered every slide. When do you want to do?
We were, I mean, clearly the right thing to do, that the questions come up as we, shall I highlight two more areas? Would that be okay? So on the education front, slide 7, so again, it's going to be one area we're really pleased about, children's services, and one we're still working on. So on the bottom left, where it says, and apologies, it says EHCP, it should say Education, Health and Care Plan. Always trying to get rid of abbreviations in these documents. So this is our statutory requirements about special educational needs assessments. So where an assessment request comes forward from a family or from a special educational needs coordinator in school, known as a SENCO, then we make two decisions. As a special needs service in my area, we decide whether to assess or not, and if we do decide to assess, we're required by the Department of Education to complete that assessment within 20 weeks. Quite a complex process, because it's not only our own internal staff, it's our educational psychologists, for instance. Almost always, you're seeking a health assessment, maybe from a speech and language therapist, another therapist, might be around mental health, for instance, and we are able to achieve that within 20 weeks for 100% of the children we agree to assess.
Sorry, that's speaking about
and
it's extraordinary.
It really is, and you know, I have to say, you know, education is the lead agency in working both with health colleagues and with our social care colleagues. It might be an assessment around short breaks provision for a disabled child. All of that has to come together in one document within 20 weeks across the country. The proportion is a lot lower, and so we're really proud of that, and I have to say it's not easy to achieve. Then top left on that page, an area we're still working on, we spoke about it earlier under the Northern Inclusion Pilot, is our fixed term exclusion rate. So you'll see there, and again it's validated data as of summer 2022, showing that our fixed term exclusion rate, or suspensions as they're now called, is slightly above the inner London average, but below national. We know these rates have been increased, of course they've increased since COVID, because children weren't in school, so of course there were no suspensions. But for a number of reasons, you know, some schools have spoken to us about more challenging behaviour, and we're hopeful that the programmes we're running, whether it's through what we commission through Ormiston Academy Trust and through our behaviour outreach, through early help, through other interventions, that we can help to reduce that fixed term exclusion in budget.
On
Worth
this
saying that's
particular,
why it's not just our residents, it's school population.
Fixed, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's the you know state school population. Exactly.
which includes our residents and our
Exactly.
residents.
That's exactly.
On the exclusions, sorry, Glenn. On this in particular, one question I have is, there is always a pushback with exclusion from the community. from some groups. And my concern is exclusion doesn't happen in a vacuum, happens for reasons. And I'm a believer that you understand the reasons, you probably have a better way of curing the problem. But when you get pushback, sometimes, do pushbacks affect your decision on the policy making? Because I'm concerned, there's a lot of loud noises around, us talking about don't exclude, don't, keep everybody in, understand that. But sometimes you need to exclude those who disrupt others from learning. And sometimes they need to be excluded so they have issues they need to deal with and fix before they come into mainstream education.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's the head teacher's decision to exclude, and obviously it's the responsibility of governors to make sure that schools have got a really clear exclusion policy. There's statutory guidance around exclusions, and also to have a really clear behaviour policy. And what we try to do within the local authority is share practice and support and advise schools in that area. Fortunately, our permanent exclusion rates are really low, but when a head teacher might be considering a permanent exclusion for a very serious matter, they will talk to our statutory exclusions officer or wards and seek advice. Sometimes we will offer advice, particularly if it's these are very rare examples, but I'll give you these examples. If we're talking about a child who is looked after, or perhaps a child with an education, health and care plan, we will do everything we can to work with that school to consider whether a managed move rather than a permanent exclusion might be the right way forward, and also consider, particularly again through the early help team, is there any support that could be provided as an alternative to exclusion? But you're absolutely right. The head teacher takes the needs of all children in school into account, and sometimes the exclusions policy has to be enacted.
Just if I may, following on from Waller's point, I was going to bring this up later, but it kind of looks here now, because you mentioned slide 12, I think it is, that there's a discussion here about this reducing exclusion, reducing PXs. One of the things I am very clear about is children have to take responsibility for their actions, and sometimes that does mean a permanent exclusion. And the one thing that we should be celebrating in this borough is that if you exclude from a mainstream school here, we have very excellent alternative provision that gets these children back into mainstream education, having learned their lesson though, and it's very successful. If you constantly avoid that permanent exclusion, when you're talking about very serious things that a child has to understand, they are never going to be ready for society. So,
and the number one priority for us and our shared responsibility with schools is to make sure that children of statutory school age are in full-time education.
Yes.
And you're absolutely right, Amanda. If a child is excluded at the primary or secondary level permanently, very rare, that they are able to access pretty much immediately. And obviously, we work with the family on this, a full-time place with a broad curriculum, which isn't the case of the local authorities in a Ormiston Academy. Sometimes you're building up from a part-time timetable into a full-time, admittedly, and then if a child is ready, unless they're in year 11, we then work well with mainstream schools and they have a fresh start, new mainstream
but
place.
to put it in context, in the time that you might be leading up to that managed move, the child might only be 20% in school anyway, because they might be sort of refusing virtually every subject other than the one they like. So sometimes these smaller staff ratios and the change can actually be very beneficial. So it's not all that.
And I think the last point I'd make is that, unlike some other boroughs, there's an agreement with Schools Forum that our high needs funding for alternative provision also includes funding for temporary placements. So as well as our core provision at Ormiston Latimer Alternative Provision Academy, we've also got the Goldbourne Education Centre where children, still enrolled at their mainstream school, they're still in their school uniform, but there may be an agreed placement that the mainstream school pays for 6 to 12 weeks, where they're getting specialist support. The mainstream schools, they're plenty at risk of a long suspension or a permanent exclusion, and that specialist support and then the reintegration support helps to avoid that and keeps our rates lower. And there's also a really experienced primary behaviour outreach team who will go out and support primary schools and build capacity in the classroom when needed to.
If I may go back to the HCP.
Yes, of course.
Slide 7 of the right. First of all, I'd like to say that join in the congratulations for the 100% giveaway. The question is not to do with that. The question is really to do with what happens after HCC has been put in place. Dividing this in perhaps into two areas. There's those areas where the council or schools are directly involved. I would expect the follow-up to be as assiduous as the planning. The question though is as to whether other agencies, in particular NHS, provide all the support to the same tempo as needed once the plan is in place.
So that's a really good question, Councillor Pascal. So the local authority through the SEN service has a duty to ensure that the provision specified in the Education, Health and Care Plan is delivered. And obviously we work with the school and other agencies, therapists for instance, to do that. So we would expect the school to tell us where provision, I think does often relate perhaps to health provision, isn't being delivered, and then we will challenge and work with our health partners to put that in place. So for instance, they might have a vacancy for a speech and language therapist, so what are they doing to get a locum therapist in place or provide that support? Yes, sometimes there are delays in provision, and it's our job then to try and make sure that those delays are minimised. The main way in which that is monitored is through a school-led annual review of the plan. This isn't a statutory indicator. I'm happy to share with you that we would like more annual reviews to be happening on time or in schools. My head's letter to schools, very much emphasises that. We know what pressure schools are under, and the same goes. But if a school says actually needs aren't being met, or the parent is no longer confident that needs are being met, perhaps because there's a gap in provision, then we may be asking SEN to work with the parents to find a new placement for the child. But we're really hopeful we can intervene before that to get the right provision in place.
Because I'm concerned. I don't know how much evidence there is, and I don't know whether Amanda shares this too. But sometimes it's more difficult to get help from the NHS in this context. It's within the school.
And so if it's set on the education and health care plan, it needs to be delivered. But sadly, that there are staff recruitment challenges actually across the public sector, including in the NHS. I would say that
you're being very diplomatic.
Well,
there is a problem which good well-intentioned people in the NHS are trying to deal with, but I think
but comparatively, I think we're in a better position than other local areas. I would say that that's definitely what our Ofsted report for SEN said last year, that inspectors sought services here they've not seen anywhere else in the country. But there are challenges.
And Sarah Newman is a real champion. She sits on with various boards with her colleagues and highlights areas where she's unsatisfied or feels there could be improvement. So I think there is that open dialogue around how we challenge one another.
she's certainly not shy of speaking.
I suppose that's the point I'm making.
Do you have a question?
I'm recovering from back injury, so I shouldn't be sitting more than half an hour,
Okay,
and that was really an hour.
okay.
So I have to sit and stand
Okay.
and move.
No, I'm just
stretch.
asking if you have a question.
No.
While you're standing. No, we will fine. We'll be okay. If you want to lean against the wall.
No, that's even better.
That's what solved this.
Yeah.
So should I perhaps hand over to Glenn who's going to highlight
Yeah.
a couple of areas in the social care?
Yeah.
I mean, firstly, I'd like to bring your attention to slide 8 and some of the qualitative feedback rather than performance data that some of our families have been saying around the support that they've received from social work and social care. And I think there's a real richness in some of the feedback that you received there. So I'm particularly proud about that. In terms of the performance data, I think slide 5, the completion, 100% completion on our initial child protection conferences within 15 days is quite significant when you think about the work that needs to go on in terms of inviting our multi-agency partners, undertaking the assessment, ensuring that all of that is undertaken in a timely way. And I think 100% performance is really great. CP visits and timetables, you can see that that's on an improving trajectory. I should say that in the Royal Borough we have made our CP visits every 2 weeks, where actually statutory it was every month. So we're doing extremely well there in terms of that. And actually there are some families that will refuse our entry. So I think the figure of 92% is we've even got families that are out of the country. As Councillor Fawkes very much knows. To which we're obliged to monitor those children's welfare. So I think that's something to bring your attention to. I also wanted to draw your attention to our referrals over time, and you may not have seen the footnote here because you'll see it as a downward trajectory when actually we've just from this April we've changed our case management system. So we're now able to differentiate between what's seen as initial contact and a referral. So we were predicting this downward trajectory. That isn't to say that work is going down in terms of demand. It's just that we're more accurately able to report that from our data system. I think the other area to say, which is really around a measure of high cost high demand, our looked after children numbers has remained relatively static. At 107 is the report here. I know that it's currently at 111. And that's a combination of unaccompanied asylum seeking children. You'll see in the box there 31 and our local children at 76. And that's an area I think that we constantly need to monitor because it's an indicator of the support that we're providing our local residents to try and avoid children coming into public care if we can. I think they were the areas that I wanted to highlight in terms of social care. The other area that I wanted to highlight to you is on slide 6. And you will see that the reoffending rate within 12 months looks like it's gone up quite significantly. It is below the London and England percentage. But I just wanted to draw your attention to what sits behind that 26.7%. We are actually talking about 8 children or 8 young people. So actually our cohort is very, very small. It's 31, out of which 8 have reoffended. So you just need one other child and your percentage figures. So it's really important that we look beneath the percentage, I guess. So they were the areas that I wanted to highlight from a social care perspective. The other area that I think is very, very topical and is on everybody's mind, particularly about what's just happened in Croydon, is around serious youth violence. And actually what you can see this year, thus far, is actually very, very low. But actually the anxieties that we know within our local communities is very high in terms of what's happening in the whole world.
May we ask general questions now? Any more highlighted?
I'll let you go ahead and ask your questions here.
Okay, thank you. On slide 9, you're highlighting the percentages of MMR vaccinations, and there's been quite a lot of press, hasn't there, recently about the upsurge in measles and the some of the refusers of the MMR. Speaking in schools, what they basically said that they won't push vaccinations at all. They won't discuss with the children because the parents may have taken the decision. It's not for them to discuss with children. However, what they both said was they will send out what we provide. So if we have certain areas, particularly primary schools, you may see certain sectors of the borough that, there may be less take up, and maybe you could produce something to deliver to schools that could be given out that might be helpful.
We can certainly speak to our public health colleagues
Yeah.
about that. That's an area that obviously a better monitor.
You might do year 7 in secondary schools just to,
And perhaps just to add that, public health colleagues regularly, and obviously during COVID, very, very regularly, would request to come to head teachers' meetings to give updates, and that has continued. Debbie Aragon, who leads in that area, is very well known by head teachers, so we do try and make sure that, I think public health are really proactive actually in terms of contacting schools, offering support and advice, and seeking their feedback, but obviously, clearly with the data, there's always more we can do with public health in that area.
then on slide 10, I had a question for, I guess, Glenn, or Catherine, I don't know. There's some feedback from service users and various things, but a couple of points on advocacy, and I just wondered, these are obviously very positive comments, and I just wondered if there'd been anything negative. Are these just samples of, or are these really the full story?
I don't think there's been anything negative from the family perspective, from families that utilise the service. From my understanding, I haven't heard anything negative. I do hear of some of the professional dilemmas that advocacy can, by its very nature, may occur. So certainly from our educators, head teachers, etc., they often can feel that there can sometimes be a tension. And I think it goes back to the point that you were making earlier on around school exclusion. And when is it right for that to happen? And often that is a tension between the family, the advocate, who should really be remaining neutral and presenting the voice of helping the voice of the family to be shared. I think sometimes there's been a sense that role may have moved into a different mode from time to time, and that's feedback that has been given the provider of that service, which is a
slightly less of a neutral position and more of a sort of pet barrister sort of for the family. Is that what you're trying to get to?
I think that some of the feedback that I've heard could be that it's been perhaps a bit more adversarial. It's been needed.
Okay, thank you, that's interesting.
This section 47 on page 1, slide 5.
You're right to raise our acronyms or our legislative quotes. It's a particular section of the Children Act, which is called Section 47, and it's our duty to investigate when we believe that significant harm has either taken place or is likely to take place. It's a quote from it's quoting a particular statutory responsibility.
I couldn't find it here, that's what I asked.
Well done.
I have a good question. So slide 3, the health development. Are you able to explain? It looks like there's quite a significant rise in reception via obesity, and I don't quite understand the difference between the population BMI cut points and the clinical BMI cut points. Are you able to explain why it looks like that? Is that an accurate depiction? 13% to 20, a rise from 13 to 21% in reception via obesity for girls.
I mean, this would be what our data is telling us. So I think it would be a true reflection. I think if you're asking for some of the reasons behind that, I think there are links with the cost of living crisis and access to healthy food, for example. So I do think it's an area that I know our public health colleagues are specifically focusing on, because they do see that as a concern.
And schools, is there anything that schools can do to mitigate that? 13 to 21% seems quite a significant rise over the past 5 years.
I think that our public health colleagues will be more expert at explaining this than we are. But there'll be something about how the data is measured, but that there is a concern here.
Yeah.
They're flagging that with us. I mean, I suppose there's a whole range of ways in which schools would try and support families to deal with this. I mean, A, through the school lunches they themselves provide, levels of activity at schools. Primary schools do receive a grant for physical education, and they use that in the best way they can around sports coaching, learning about healthy eating as well, where possible. So thinking about food technology and cooking, and a lot of that links then to family support that runs on site.
And I was just going to highlight, in fact, Mary knows all about this. So we did do a project a few years ago called Go Global, which was through public health, where we focused on some of the schools in the north of the borough, and we put all sorts of measures in place, giving them water bottles, giving them fruit when they left school so they didn't go and buy crisps on the way home, menus, food education, charts with what they should be eating. And actually, what was quite depressing, the outcomes of that were really quite depressing. I mean, it was sort of like a 1% shift over quite a long programme. So, as Jamie Oliver will tell you, it's an incredibly hard thing, because really, what you're eating is coming from so much from your family and from home, and to what you're having there. So the schools can do their best and try it, but actually you pick that up on slide 9, of course, where they just look at the year 6 obesity levels. The levels are even higher, which which is worrying. And then when you get to secondary school, I think they're even higher than that. So it is a worrying thing, and it was something that I want to look at with the now free school meals have been rolled out to everyone. I mean, free school meals are great, but they need to be healthy free school meals. And with the amount they're given, then there's might be an issue in providing the right.
But I think the issue is, I mean, you can have the healthiest possible free school meal in school, but once you go home,
Yes.
and if you don't know what you're eating, it doesn't matter what you do in school.
Yeah.
And especially a lot of people eat poorly simply because they just potatoes with a little bit of something fattening is filling, as opposed to buying some chicken.
There is studies, isn't there, that we deprivation and poverty.
Exactly.
I suppose school could be more impactful, focusing on activity and sport, rather than, I suppose, managing what can be eaten and what can't be eaten.
Well, they do,
They
but
do.
at the same time, they have to be mindful of covering the curriculum, so they've only got so many hours that they can do it.
Or so much space in which to do it in, and so
No.
actually there's
So not even schools, a lot of the other programmes that we just learned about can also get children involved in all sorts of activities after school.
Well, that would be something that we're looking at in the youth review is, what's important? Is it that they do sport after school, or more learning, or more computer skills? That's what you've got to divide your money up as to how, what's the best thing to.
Well, cooking is the most important thing. We are spending 1/3 of our lives eating.
Yeah,
We need to learn how to eat.
yeah. And some schools obviously do cooking lessons, some really good ones.
The other thing that can lead to obesity and also poor mental health is poor sleep as well. And again, deprivation, if you've got families stuck together and not enough rooms, etc., where they're not getting good sleep, you can also.
Yeah.
Another question.
It was just supplementary on the MMR stuff. I'm going to ask what help is given to schools to staff to make sure that they have the right inoculations for the MMR, etc. And not MMR COVID particularly currently. Because if you have a lot of sick staff, it's so particularly at the moment, at the beginning of the respiratory disease. I went to a governor's meeting at Chow West, and we had a presentation from Leslie Watts. Winter season is on us. It's happening. So they are gearing up. I know most school teachers will not be over 75, so they won't be offered their COVID.
Nor free flu anymore.
Not free flu. So is there some initiative in that direction?
So again, that would be school-led, but through public health advice that's given to schools, that's very much also about, I was talking to a head teacher yesterday, we were talking about key challenges, and she said, pupil and staff sickness in equal measure.
Yeah.
So offering that support and advice through public health to our head teachers, leadership teams to support their staff around their well-being and keeping healthy and considering where they can access vaccinations to do so.
Yeah, no, unless they're offered by the NHS for free, is there any thought of any finance for schools?
So that would have to come through public health, and I'm not aware currently that they're offering that.
Any other questions? Mary?
No, thanks, I'll take some things on later.
Okay, well, thank you. I love this type of presentation because it's very easy to grasp and digest. So thank you very much. I think you talked about asking people what they want and prioritize within their priorities. We spoke about offset rating, attendance, exclusion, SEN, vaccinations, and even the help we need when we can get to school. Talked about food and food preparation and everything. So I think we can move on to the next topic now, which is item A6, the work program. This report sets out the Select Committee's work program for the municipal year 2023-24. Select Committee members are recommended to discuss and agree the detailed work plan for 2023-2024 as presented in Appendix 1. You can say handout if you have a handout.
It's up to you, no, we're happy to, you decide.
Yeah,
Turn to go, Steve.
no, it's, I think if we've had a long day, we can. I would relieve.
Listen, you already.
Listen, you already have some.
I'll listen.
Yeah, okay.
After listening, if I can
Oh,
help on the web
fantastic.
plan,
Thank
just in
you.
case you.
Do you mind if I listen in or not? Because I'd quite like to know what you're planning to do.
I welcome all of you to stay, but I just
I'm sure
want
you're
you
being
to,
kind.
yes,
Thank you.
you know,
Thank you.
I understand you've been here all day, yes. So, yeah. Okay, questions from councillors? Yeah, okay. So if there are any questions, you can, shall we just go ahead and agree this program as it is, as on the agenda?
I have no objections.
No objections? Okay. Well, yeah,
That's fine.
all good, all righty. I guess we are leaving it. Someone's very happy. So, one more item, yeah, it's this is very quick. So, okay, in this case,
Sorry, can I interrupt? Sorry,
Absolutely.
maybe it's not my right to do this.
No.
But we're not going to discuss what's in his spread.
No, that's the next.
that's
Oh, that's the next
one.
item, I'm sorry.
This is, yeah, this is, no, that's what you, yeah. This is the fun bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is the working group terms of reference.
Yeah.
The committee will receive an update on the proposed working group from the working group chair, Councillor Pascal.
Okay. You've all had the paper that was published and circulated. And it's basically, it's self-explanatory. But what I would like to draw attention to is there are two items and one small technical point. Basically, the two items that have come up in conversation since this was published. One is the fact that the scope is very large, and the second one is that it's going to need some good project management to make sure we get the report done in time. So we had, Jackie Hurt and I had a meeting with Sarah Newman and Patrick Brooks, at which, whilst they were assiduous in avoiding the terrible mistake of trying to steer scrutiny as to what we should work on, they did give us some very good points. The first one was a technical one, was that the team around a child is a term that's already used in FCS high needs work, and therefore we will use the term child's team. to differentiate from that. I myself had just used the team around the child purely colloquially, and I didn't know that it was a sort of semi-official term. So I think it just clarifies that. The second thing is that we will start by asking public health to map out the general provision available to all families from 0 to 11 and to identify the support to overcome current transitions. Because in some of the work we've looked at already, one of the crucial things is what's available, how it's communicated, and then how that overcomes transitions. What I mean by transition is when somebody changes from, for instance, being at home to being in nursery, and going from nursery into primary. Because at that stage, all sorts of things, children need to be school ready if they're going to benefit fully from school. When you go from one provision to another one, GDPR means not all the data can be put across, which may be beneficial to the child's the early identification of needs and such like doesn't necessarily get. But the key thing is we want an overall mapping of what's available. Now that's going to be a very broad map across the borough for all children. That's what's available. And then we'll ask FCS, Child and Children's Services, to update on progress and lessons from the existing 0 to 5 strategy, because we have an existing borough 0 to 5 strategy. How this will, how to enable transition into primary school at 5, and how to identify and implement SEN support. Now, SEN support is different from EHCP, which is a full, we reached a certain level. SEN support is the support that's put in below that threshold to enable children to achieve the maximum potential and to stop the transition from that condition into needing more specialised support from EHCP. And the also to support, to look at the transition, which is most children go through when they join primary school, to see how that's working. So you've got the 0 to 5 strategy and how the transition works into the primary school. And to support during the period of primary school from 5 to 11, so that they achieve, as I said, the full potential, reaching higher needs. And the whole point here is that there is a rising demand for specialist and high need services. And the question is by how much that can be reduced by intervening earlier with SEN support services. So we want to tease out what's being achieved, the programme that's already been implemented. And then we will ask NHS to brief us on their contribution through the Integrated Care Board, the commissioning and provision of services from 0 to 5 and 5 to 11, because we want to know what their vision and their objectives are, because this is all being rewritten and redefined under the reorganisation of NHS, in our case in North West London. And then we will also look at the role of family hubs and voluntary community services, especially during out-of-school hours and out-of-term time, because it's all very well children to be at school, have brilliant schools and all the services around that. If in the evenings and in holidays there's no support. So this is an outline. This is meant to be a supplementary statement to the methodology and approach on page 41 of today's papers. It's the third page in this method. To try to indicate how we will start implementing this programme. Final thing to say is that I believe that the approach to the public health, to FCS and NHS can happen in parallel, because we're requesting reports there. And we should not do this as a sequential thing, because it will take too long in terms of months. We should be putting out requests to these 3 agencies at the same time, and then planning how we bring that information back into the working group and to the committee. So that's the supplementary statement I want to make, which hopefully Luke has managed to capture. I can give you a copy of it. You have a copy of it?
Yeah.
Right, good.
Thank you.
So I'd be very happy to ask any question. One thing I will say is that we have members of the working group identified in this paper.
Yeah, it's you,
That's
Councillor David Lindsay,
the
Councillor Mohammed Bikhtiyar,
Yeah.
Richard,
Dureki.
Direct,
Yep.
sorry.
And we already have support identified within NHS, public health, FCS obviously, thank you for your support. And we're exploring the voluntary services connection. So, questions please. I mean, I think for members of the working group, particularly Mo, you've probably got a lot of questions, and I'd like to take those, unless there's a burning one now. General
I'll
questions.
wait for a meeting,
We're
so we can.
going to have a meeting pretty soon,
Yes.
but I think
Any general questions then? Okay, Mary? Well, the committee is required to agree the membership of the working group and the terms of reference as set out in the appendix. Do we agree?
Agreed.
I agree.
I'd just like to say thank you, because I think that's a lot of work, and it's very good for you to take it on.
And I'm glad it's a little bit tapered down because it was huge and you would have been.
yeah, I think that the that this is that I would like to pay credit in two directions. First of all, to Jackie and Luke and Bella who've been helping putting together some of the work, those wording that I had. And the second thing is that from Councillor Brooks and Sarah Newman and Lynn Hegg's team have been valuable, not only in their own area of activity, but guiding us through their knowledge of other partners and organisations who we should talk to.
That's why we're the best house.
So thank you.
Okay, now we move on to the final item, which is any other business. Does anybody have any urgent matters they would like to raise?
Well, I have,
Uh-huh.
my recovery working the same time. I have a comfortable chair next time until, hopefully, I will need it for one meeting only.
Okay,
This is very
so,
comfortable for
okay,
me.
or maybe just bring your
Yeah.
little, bring your maybe.
I've been avoiding meeting in general in the
You have
past
to
4
have
months.
donuts somewhere in
Can
council?
I say that from my experience of working in the council,
Yeah.
that there are chairs within the council which are special chairs.
Special,
I don't know what the right term is, but they're, if you like,
orthopedic chairs.
orthopedic, that's the word I'm looking for.
Oh, yes.
And maybe the Jackie could ask on behalf of
I'm not disabled,
Well,
but
we can find-
You can talk to the facilities team.
Exactly, yeah, we'll see where.
I remember